All right, this is section 9, topic 9 about outliers in data. So we have already kind of talked about outliers, and I feel like this is probably just kind of a review lesson for you. So we're going to walk through this rather quickly, just touch on what outliers are and what they affect. So a survey about the average number of text messages sent per day was conducted at a retirement home. This is the data. So the mean for this data is 8.7 and the median is 10. Grandma Gadget is up to date on the latest technology and loves to text her 25 grandchildren. She sends an average of 85 texts per day. Her data point is substituted for one of the original data points of 15. The new data set is that, okay? Which measure of center will be most affected by substituting Grandma Gadget, the mean or the median? Justify your answer. So I want you to think through this. If we substituted in that 85, okay, we substituted it in for one of the 15, so that's actually the largest number. The median will not be affected because if I mark out from here, if I mark out on each side, my median is still going to be 10. However, the mean will be pulled by this 85 up. So the median stays the same, while the mean will increase. The median stays the same, but the mean increases. Okay? So if we wanted to find out the new mean, you could add all those numbers up, divide by however many there are. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. So add them all up, divide by 15. Your new mean will be 13.3, whereas the median is still 10. Does Grandma Gadget's data have a greater effect on the standard deviation or the interquartile range? So if our median stayed the same, none of our other numbers around the median changed aside from this 85 out here. That means that the IQR stays the same. But the standard deviation changes the most because the data is more spread out. Now, let me remind you that the IQR is based on the median. It comes from the median because we start with that median and then find Q1 and Q3, whereas the standard deviation is based on the mean. Okay, moving right along. Grandma Gadget's data point is called an outlier. Okay, an outlier. So that's a really important vocab word. If we don't have it, we need to make sure we get it. So an outlier is an extreme value in a data set that is very distant from the others. You could have a high outlier or you could have a low outlier. So let's look at a few. The table below lists the number of customers who visited a car dealership during 30 randomly selected days. Identify the outlier and describe how it affects the mean and the standard deviation. So the outlier in this case, let's look through all the numbers. I see some 20s, some 30s. It looks to me like my outlier is 11. The outlier in the data set caused the mean to decrease because it is less than average. Okay, and you could look at these numbers and see that average is going to be somewhere upper 20s to low to mid 30s, and the standard deviation to increase because it puts a bigger spread in that data set. So the mean would decrease and the standard deviation would increase. Okay? So the students in Mrs. Gomez's class were surveyed about the number of text messages they send per day. The data is as follows. What value would you predict to be an outlier? You're right, 0 is an outlier because all the rest of these are 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. How does the outlier affect the mean? Well, it's lower than the data, lower than average, so it would decrease the mean. How does it affect the median? It does not affect the median. Unless the number you replace is the median, then that outlier is not going to affect the median. Which measure of center would best describe the data, the mean or the median? Remember, when we have an outlier, the median is always what we want to rely on because it's not affected by that outlier. How does the outlier affect the standard deviation? It increases it because remember that when the data is more spread out, the standard deviation is higher. How does the outlier affect the IQR? It does not change. In this one, it does not change the IQR because it is based on that median. So we're really just looking in this section at how it affects everything. So how does an outlier being in the data change everything? Which measure of spread would best describe the data, the standard deviation or the IQR? Remember, when there's an outlier, we want to rely on median and IQR. So let's look at Beat the Test. Let's adjust this just a little bit. Sorry about that. Fuzzy camera for just a second. All right, the dot plot below compares the arrival times of 30 flights for two different airlines. A negative number represents the number of minutes the flight arrived before its scheduled time. A positive number represents the number of minutes the flight arrived after its scheduled time. A 0 indicates that the flight arrived at its scheduled time. Based on these data, from which airline would you choose to buy your ticket? Use your knowledge of shape, center, and outliers and spread to justify your choice. Okay, so you want to see which ones were the most on time or early. So let's look at each of these. So airline P has generally a normal distribution. Okay. Most flights are either early or on time. There might be a little bit that are late. But look at airline Q. It's got sometimes they're a little early. Sometimes they're on time. A lot of times they're late. They could be even as much as 60 minutes late, even an hour late. So I would probably choose, if this was my question, I would choose airline P. It's more predictable, okay? It's more normal, which probably means it's more dependable, okay? The mean is around 0. The mean is on-time flight. So on average, your flights are on time. Okay. Now there is the outlier of 60 here, and the outlier of 45. Those count against airline Q since they are flights that were extremely late. But that's not a normal occurrence, that's an outlier. So, after a long day at Disney World, a group of students were asked how many times they each rode Space Mountain. The values are as follows. Are there any outliers in this data set? Yes, the outlier in this case would be 19. So it is much higher than the other numbers. And because we have a much higher number, it causes the mean to be greater than the median. If the outlier were changed to 5, the interquartile range would stay the same, but the standard deviation would decrease because right now the outlier makes a higher spread in the data, but if it was 5, the standard deviation would be much smaller because the data would be much closer together. All right, if you have any questions, let your teacher know.